What happened when an undercover CEO walked into his own buffet restaurant and witnessed a young hostess secretly paying for a veteran's meal, just to protect the man's dignity? Welcome, thoughtful listeners. Your heart for justice, kindness, and real stories is what brings life to this channel. Today's tale is one of quiet courage, corporate coldness, and a moment of compassion that sparked a company-wide revolution. If you've ever believed that doing the right thing matters, even when it costs you, this story will move you. Stay tuned, because what begins with meatloaf and a soft smile ends in legacy. The November wind lashed against the cracked windows of Golden Bay Buffet, turning the glass into a trembling membrane between warmth and the cold, indifferent night. Inside, fluorescent lights hummed above rows of half-filled trays and empty booths, their glow reflecting off polished sneeze guards and stainless steel tongs. The dinner rush had come and gone, leaving behind the distant clatter of dishes and the occasional cough from a tired server. At the front entrance, the door creaked open, letting in a gust of rain and an elderly man whose presence seemed to shrink against the wind. Arthur Maddox, a 75-year-old Vietnam veteran, stood just inside, brushing droplets from his worn army green jacket. His cap, faded with time, bore the words Vietnam Vet stitched in gold that had dulled with age. His fingers, weathered and trembling, clutched a wallet so thin it looked like it might snap. He scanned the colorful posters on the wall, $10.99 lunch specials, kids eat free Wednesdays. But the one he was searching for was gone. The Veterans Eat Free Thursdays banner had been removed weeks ago, part of a quiet cost-cutting measure ordered by corporate. Still, habit had drawn him here: hunger, pride, and maybe hope. He moved slowly toward the front podium, where a hostess glanced up from her reservation tablet. Her name tag read Haley. She was young, early 20s maybe, and had the look of someone who smiled too much for someone who worked too hard. "Evening," Arthur said softly, his voice raspy but polite. "Do you still do the veterans discount?" The words hung in the air longer than they should have. Haley blinked. She remembered when her grandfather used to come in every Thursday, how he'd wear his medals beneath his flannel shirt just to feel seen. She glanced toward the manager's office where Cassandra Reeves sat behind the glass, not smiling. The discount had been discontinued last month, and she'd been warned not to make emotional exceptions. But Haley looked at Arthur's posture, upright but barely, his hands empty but clean, and she made a decision. "We sure do, sir," she said gently. "Come right on in. Make yourself a plate." A flicker of relief crossed Arthur's face. He nodded, clutching his cap, and stepped past the buffet line like he'd just been handed a lifeline. Unseen by both of them, a dishwasher in the back paused mid-rinse, his gaze lingering longer than it should. His name tag read Carl. But his real name was Colin Drake, and he owned every booth, tray, and square inch of that building. Haley Brooks stood behind the front podium of Golden Bay Buffet, pretending to scroll through reservation notes on the touchscreen, though her mind was spinning. She'd just offered a free meal to a guest who, by policy, shouldn't have received one. Arthur Maddox had already begun moving toward the buffet, his cautious gait as deliberate as a soldier on patrol. The smell of fried chicken and buttered rolls wafted through the air as he picked up a plate and reached, with visible hesitation, for a spoonful of green beans. Haley watched him from her post, heart pounding with a strange mix of fear and defiance. She knew she had just violated Cassandra Reeves' latest mandate: no free meals, no exceptions, not even veterans. But what was she supposed to do? Watch that man walk out hungry just to protect a bullet point on a spreadsheet? Her mind flashed to her grandfather, a proud Marine who used to wear his dog tags under every sweater. He never talked about the war, only the discipline, the duty, the pride of service. He passed last winter. Since then, Haley had promised herself, "If I ever see someone who reminds me of him, I won't just smile and walk by." This moment felt like a test of that quiet vow. Cassandra's voice echoed from the office behind her, sharp, clipped, on the phone with someone from regional. Haley knew she wouldn't have many minutes before the system flagged the comped meal. Still, she walked over to the order kiosk and keyed in the manager override. Under comp reason, she selected Promo Reinstatement Veterans Thursday and held her breath before hitting submit. The system accepted it. No red lights, no alarms. She exhaled slowly and stepped back to the podium, keeping one eye on Arthur as he settled into a booth in the corner. He had only taken small portions, mac and cheese, meatloaf, and a slice of peach cobbler. He unfolded a napkin on his lap like it was fine dining. Back in the kitchen, the dishwasher named Carl watched through the open window. He wasn't watching the plates or the staff. He was watching Haley, observing her subtle movements, the flicker of hesitation followed by quiet resolve, the way she didn't look for praise. That kind of choice, he thought, told you everything you needed to know about a person. And Carl, Colin Drake, CEO in disguise, had just seen something money couldn't buy: character. The next hour passed quietly, too quietly for Haley Brooks. Though the dining room remained peaceful with only a handful of families lingering over dessert, a subtle weight had settled over her chest like a storm waiting just beyond the horizon. From her spot at the front, she watched as Arthur Maddox finished his meal slowly, wiping his mouth with a napkin, then carefully folding it as if returning a flag. He caught her eye and gave a small nod, grateful, proud, and perhaps embarrassed all at once. Haley returned the gesture with a soft smile, her nerves fraying. She knew time was running out. Any minute now the system would ping the manager's dashboard with the comped meal and its unusual override code. Sure enough, just as Arthur placed his tray on the busing cart and tipped his cap toward the exit, Cassandra Reeves stormed out of her office like a thundercloud in heels. "Hallie, office, now." The words cracked through the dining room like a dropped tray. The other employees stiffened, heads turned. Haley followed in silence, her stomach in knots. The second the office door clicked shut, Cassandra spun around, face flushed with a kind of rage reserved for people who mistake control for leadership. "Do you want to explain this?" she snapped, spinning her monitor to reveal the receipt. "Veterans Thursday, that promotion was discontinued last month. This isn't a playground for your bleeding heart experiments." Haley swallowed. "I covered the meal, out of my own paycheck." "You think that makes it better?" Cassandra hissed. "You lied. You created a false policy. If that man tells anyone he got a discount, we're liable. Do you understand what that means?" "I was just trying to spare him the humiliation," Haley said quietly. "He served this country. He shouldn't have to count pennies for meatloaf." "Well, congratulations," Cassandra snapped. "You've just earned a 2-week unpaid suspension pending review. Turn in your apron, your name tag, and clock out. Now." Haley's hands trembled as she peeled off her name badge, her face burning with a mix of shock and fury. She didn't plead, didn't argue. She just nodded once and walked out, passing by Arthur's empty table on her way to the door. She had given a man a quiet moment of dignity and been punished for it. Outside, the rain had stopped, but the pavement still shimmered with puddles. Somewhere behind her, the dishwasher watched as the door closed behind her, his expression unreadable, but his mind already made up. This wasn't going to end here. Haley sat cross-legged on her creaky twin mattress, staring blankly at her phone as the screen glowed with an empty bank balance. The hum of her tiny apartment's aging radiator was the only sound in the room, save for the occasional car splashing through puddles outside. The $14.00 she had left would barely cover gas, let alone groceries, or the looming electric bill. Her stomach growled, but the idea of making dinner felt like too much effort. She had spent her night helping a man who reminded her of her grandfather, and now, in return, she had no job, no paycheck, and no backup plan. Her roommate, Jess, peeked into the room holding a mug of herbal tea. "Anything from work?" she asked gently. Haley shook her head. "No, just..." Silence. Jess placed the mug on the nightstand and sat beside her. "You did the right thing," she said. "They'll realize that," Haley offered a tired smile. "Maybe, but right now the right thing doesn't pay rent." She opened her laptop, fingers hovering over a job search tab. Listings for gas stations, convenience store night shifts, and weekend elder care filled the screen. Nothing with benefits, nothing stable. Her eyes burned. 3 years at Golden Bay Buffet, perfect attendance, great customer service reviews, and it had all been erased over a plate of meatloaf and peach cobbler. Out of habit, she searched the name Arthur Maddox and found a brief local news article from a few years back. Vietnam vet honored for service at VFW event. A photo showed him standing in front of a memorial wall, chest slightly bowed, one hand on his heart. Reading it only made the injustice sting worse. Back at Golden Bay, the aftermath of Haley's suspension began to ripple quietly through the staff. In the break room, Maya, a line server, taped a small envelope to the bulletin board with a note, "For Haley, if you can spare anything." A few rolled their eyes but dropped in crumpled bills or spare change anyway. Mike, a dishwasher and former Marine, muttered, "It ain't right what they did to her," as he added a $5.00. Word spread fast, and at the back of the kitchen, Carl, the grizzled dishwasher who didn't quite fit in, continued rinsing trays in silence, though anyone watching closely might have noticed the way his eyes lingered on that envelope a little longer than they should have, his jaw tightening, a plan quietly forming behind his calm expression. Over the next 2 days, Carl, the dishwasher, became the most observant man in the building and the most underestimated. While the staff rushed through their shifts, brushing past one another with trays, spills, and sighs, Carl drifted like a quiet shadow. He washed dishes with care, never complained, and occasionally struck up casual conversations when the moment felt right. His questions, though seemingly harmless, had a purpose. "How long have you been working here, Mike?" he asked the veteran dishwasher between loads. "Place always this strict?" Mike chuckled bitterly. "Wasn't like this before Cassandra took over. Used to be more human. Now it's like walking on eggshells." Carl nodded thoughtfully. "And that girl who got suspended? Haley, right? She really paid out of her own pocket?" Mike's expression darkened. Every cent. She didn't deserve what happened, but compassion doesn't count for much around here anymore. Later, Carl wandered over to Maya, who was wiping down the sneeze guards with practiced speed. "Heard the tip jar for that Hostess got shut down," he said softly. Maya shot a cautious glance toward the manager's office. "Yeah, Cassandra found it, said it was solicitation. Give me a written warning just for taping up an envelope." Carl tilted his head. "Does she always like that?" Maya hesitated, then shrugged. "Let's just say she follows policy more than people." Carl smiled gently. "Good to know." Even Cassandra wasn't spared. Carl caught her in the back hallway reviewing schedules and casually asked, "You run this place all by yourself?" Her tone sharpened immediately. "Temporarily. But we've got standards to uphold. I don't tolerate loose rules or emotional interference. It's how a business stays afloat." Carl raised an eyebrow. "Even if it means punishing kindness?" Cassandra's eyes narrowed. "Do I know you? Just the new guy," he said, rinsing his hands and heading back to the sink. By the end of the second day, Colin Drake, still in disguise, had seen enough. He'd spoken to nearly every team member without revealing who he was, and each story painted the same picture. Fear over fairness, silence over support, and a manager who valued control more than care. And at the center of it all was a young woman punished for doing something the company should have celebrated. As he made a few final notes on his phone that night, he looked around the empty kitchen and thought, "It's time." The break room at Golden Bay Buffet buzzed with confusion as staff filed in under the weight of a mandatory meeting announcement, one that came with no warning, just a sharp intercom command: "All departments report immediately." Maya, Mike, and several servers whispered nervously, casting glances toward the kitchen. Cassandra stood at the front, clipboard in hand, lips pressed into a smile so tight it looked more like a threat. Beside her stood Ted Grayson, a fidgety assistant regional manager who looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. The staff barely had time to settle when the break room door swung open, and in stepped 3 unexpected figures. One was a tall, striking woman in a pantsuit. Another carried a professional-grade camera. And the last man, clean-shaven, sharply dressed in a navy suit, caused the room to freeze. His salt and pepper hair, calm eyes, and quiet command of the space needed no introduction. Recognition swept across the room like a gust of wind. Colin Drake, the CEO. Cassandra's face was drained of color. "Mr. Drake?" she stammered. "We weren't informed of a corporate visit. I would have—" "That's why I didn't inform you," Colin replied evenly, stepping forward. "I prefer to see things as they are, not how they're staged." He turned toward the staff. "For the past 3 weeks, I've been visiting our stores undercover. Here, I was known as Carl. Some of you worked beside me, some of you trusted me, and I'm grateful for that." He gestured to the cameraman, who connected a laptop to the break room monitor. The screen flickered, then played security footage, grainy but unmistakable. There was Haley, welcoming Arthur with warmth, overriding the system to provide the forgotten discount. The image paused on her quiet smile as she watched the veteran eat alone in the corner booth. Then came the second clip. Haley in Cassandra's office, visibly shaken, handing over her name badge while Cassandra stood cold and unmoved. A silence fell so deep it ached. Into that stillness walked Arthur Maddox, guided gently into the room by the woman in the pantsuit. He stood with dignity, even as emotion welled in his voice. "That young woman didn't just give me food. She gave me my dignity. I came in hungry. I left feeling like someone again, and she paid for it with her job." Colin turned to Cassandra. "You fired someone for showing compassion to a veteran. You embarrassed a hero and punished decency." "I followed policy," Cassandra insisted. "And I wrote that policy," Colin replied, voice steel, "to protect against theft, not to crush humanity." He paused. "You're fired." Gasps erupted. Cassandra tried to speak, but Colin raised a hand. "Escort her out," and just like that the tide turned, and a reckoning began. Haley stared at the caller ID on her phone like it couldn't possibly be real. Golden Bay Corporate Headquarters. She had spent the morning scrolling through minimum wage job listings, trying to convince herself that taking the night shift at a gas station wouldn't break her. Her bank account was nearly empty, her pride scraped raw. So when the call came, inviting her to meet with Colin Drake himself, she thought it had to be a mistake, until a sleek black sedan pulled up to her apartment with a uniformed driver holding the door open. Now, walking through the gleaming marble lobby of the company's high-rise headquarters, dressed in her one interview outfit, Haley felt like she'd stepped into another world. At the top floor, she was greeted by a composed woman named Vanessa, who led her into a quiet conference room. Inside sat Colin Drake, looking nothing like the scruffy dishwasher she'd worked beside, and next to him, Arthur Maddox, polished shoes and all, sitting with that same quiet dignity that had once broken her heart. "Miss Brooks," Colin said, rising with a smile, "thank you for coming. Please sit." Haley eased into the chair, pulse racing. "I don't understand. Why am I here?" Colin slid a folder across the table. "Because we believe in rewarding character. I saw what you did for Mr. Maddox. You didn't do it for recognition. You did it because it was right. That's the kind of person this company needs leading change." Haley opened the folder, eyes widening as she read. Director of Guest Dignity and Outreach, full-time, benefits, salary nearly tripled what she'd ever earned, tuition reimbursement for nursing school, relocation assistance. Her voice cracked. "I don't have management experience. I'm still finishing school." Colin leaned forward. "You have something more important: integrity, grace under pressure, moral courage. Skills can be taught. Characters can't." Haley looked to Arthur, whose weathered face broke into a smile. "Take it, young lady. Some of us spend a lifetime waiting for someone to see what you already carry." Tears welled in her eyes, but her voice was steady. "I'll accept, on one condition." Colin raised an eyebrow. "The first thing I want to revise is the policy that got me suspended. No one should have to break the rules to do the right thing." Colin's laugh was warm and genuine. "I think you're going to fit in just fine." A week later, Arthur Maddox stood straighter than he had in years as he entered Golden Bay's regional office, not as a customer, not as a forgotten relic from a past war, but as an employee. Dressed in a crisp new company polo and slacks that actually fit, he shook hands with Colin Drake, who welcomed him personally. "Welcome aboard, Mr. Maddox," Colin said warmly. "We're honored to have you." The title on Arthur's new badge read, Veterans Liaison Officer. A part-time role created just for him. His job wasn't about paperwork or quotas. It was about people. Each week, Arthur would visit Golden Bay locations across the region, speaking with veterans, listening to their needs, and ensuring their dignity was never left behind with their uniforms. He would also serve as a bridge between customers and local veteran organizations, connecting them to meal assistance, housing services, and healthcare resources many didn't know were available. On his first day, Arthur joined Haley in a staff orientation session where they introduced the People Over Policy initiative. While Haley spoke with passion about empathy and guest dignity, Arthur stood at her side and shared his story. "I didn't want pity," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I just wanted a meal without shame. That young woman gave it to me, and now this company is making sure no one has to choose between pride and a plate of food. The employees listened in quiet awe, many blinking back tears. Some, like Mike the dishwasher, stood and applauded. Others came forward afterward just to shake Arthur's hand or thank him for his service and for reminding them that companies could still do the right thing. When Arthur left the building that day, he didn't shuffle. He walked, head up, shoulders back, not because someone gave him a job, but because someone finally gave him back his purpose. And as he got into the passenger seat of the company car assigned for his outreach visits, he looked over at Haley, his friend, his quiet hero, and smiled. "Not bad for an old soldier, huh?" he said. She grinned. "Not bad at all." 6 months later, the headquarters of Golden Bay Buffet looked a little different. Nestled in the main lobby just below the company's mission statement hung a simple black frame containing a faded meal receipt, $12.83, next to a photo of Haley and Arthur shaking hands beneath a Veterans Eat Free Always banner. Below the frame, a brass plaque read, "Kindness isn't a liability, it's our legacy." Since that pivotal day, the company had launched the People Over Policy Initiative, a system-wide reform led by Haley Brooks and inspired by one act of quiet defiance. Store managers across the country were now trained not just in operations, but in empathy. Each location received an emergency dignity fund, allowing employees to discreetly cover meals for struggling guests without fear of punishment. Arthur Maddox became the face of Golden Bay's Veterans Outreach Program, traveling to locations, sharing his story, and quietly mentoring younger employees on what respect really looks like. He didn't ask for recognition, but often, guests would stop him to shake his hand, sometimes with tears in their eyes. In private moments, he'd tell Haley, "You didn't just give me a meal, you gave me back to myself." As for Haley, she thrived in her new role, balancing work and nursing school with grace, her voice now part of every boardroom conversation. She had gone from scanning guests at a podium to helping redefine what hospitality meant at a national level. And whenever she needed a reminder of why it mattered, she'd walk into that lobby, glance at the frame on the wall, and remember the rainy night a stranger in a worn veteran's cap reminded her, and the company that dignity is never too expensive to give. The story of Haley Brooks and Arthur Maddox teaches us that true leadership and lasting change begin with compassion. In a world often driven by policies, metrics, and profit, it's easy to forget the quiet power of doing the right thing, especially when no one's watching. Haley's small act of kindness toward a struggling veteran wasn't part of her job description. It wasn't authorized. It didn't benefit her, and yet it became the catalyst for transforming an entire company's culture. The lesson is clear. Character matters more than compliance. Rules exist to guide us, but they should never override basic human decency. For older audiences, many of whom have lived through eras of both principled leadership and institutional coldness, this story affirms a powerful truth. Integrity still counts. And for anyone who's ever been punished for showing empathy, this tale is a reminder that sometimes the right thing isn't the easiest or safest, but it's always the most enduring. Haley stood up for someone who'd once stood for his country, and in doing so reminded a CEO what his company had forgotten, that people, not policies, define a legacy worth leaving behind.